Welcome everyone, I am Adeshewa Josh and this is Africa Matters. We begin in Sudan where thousands demand a return to civilian rule as the country's leaders come under increasing pressure to stop costs from rising. And in Uganda, we'll show you how a startup company is helping farmers tackle drought and boost harvest, all by harnessing the power of the sun. We'll also profile an initiative in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, which is providing food for Muslims who cannot afford to break their fast at home during the holy month of Ramadan. April the 6th has become a symbol of resistance to authoritarian rule in Sudan. It marks 37 years since a popular uprising toppled military dictator Jafar al-Nimeri after nearly 2 decades in power. It also marks 3 years since mass protests against steep increases in the price of bread and the cost of living led to the ousting of former President Omar Bashir by the military. On Wednesday, Sudanese security forces fired tear gas at thousands of demonstrators who rallied in the capital Khartoum against the army who seized power last year. They are calling for a swift return to civilian rule. The Independent Central Committee of Sudan doctors says more than 90 people have been killed and 4,000 injured in protests since October. Many Sudanese say they're struggling to feed their families as the price of bread and other food staples hit a record high.
If this measly piece of bread is £50, what kind of life can we have? A quarter of a kilo of flour reaches 2,000 or 3,000 Sudanese pounds. This is what our country has become.
Electricity prices have gone up. So has water and food, and people do not have an opportunity to realize their positions or secure resources. We have reached a point where we do not have who to speak to about this, or even to criticize what's happening. I'm not against the roadblocks and protests happening. This is a domestic right. But what is happening is that people used to be ashamed to say that they are hungry, but now it is clear they are.
Many were hoping Sudan's economy would improve once former President Omar Bashir was removed from power. His government had imposed austerity measures and cut subsidies in response to a drop in oil revenue and crippling U.S. sanctions. Sudan's inflation has risen more than 5 times in the last 3 years to reach 260% in February. Let's take a closer look at some of the issues that led to the ousting of Bashir's government and how much has changed since then. Even though Bashir was ousted for mismanaging the economy and rising bread prices, the transitional government that replaced him instituted rapid IMF-monitored reforms, but failed to turn around the economy. Now, a small loaf of bread costs 50 Sudanese pounds instead of £2 2 years ago. On October the 25th, the military derailed a power-sharing agreement between the army and civilians, which was brokered after Bashir was ousted. The junta, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, claims the coup was necessary to save Sudan from chaos. But there have been frequent anti-military protests since then. The World Bank, IMF, and other Western donors have suspended financial aid and debt relief worth billions of dollars to Sudan until there's a return to civilian rule. Last month, the United States also imposed sanctions on Sudan's Central Reserve Police, accusing it of using excessive force against peaceful protesters. The UN Special Representative in Sudan warns that things are only going to get worse unless the military heeds the call by both its citizens and the international community to return to civilian rule. The government threatened to expel him for allegedly interfering in the country's affairs.
The aspirations of Sudanese women and men for a prosperous, civilian-led democratic future are at risk. Unless the current trajectory is corrected, the country will head towards an economic and security collapse and significant humanitarian suffering. All Sudanese stakeholders will therefore need to be prepared to make compromises in the interests of the people, for stability and for prosperity.
Let's hear more from Kholood Khair, a Sudanese political analyst and a managing partner at Insight Strategy Partners. She joins me from Khartoum, Sudan. Thank you so much for making our time to speak to Africa Matters. Would the political, economic, and security situation in Sudan have been any different today had the people's uprising that led to the power changes both in 1985 and 2019 happen through the ballot box instead of military interventions?
I think the counterfactual is quite difficult to answer. What we do know is that successive years and cycles of military dictatorship have not brought about the sort of broader aims of nation building and state building since independence. What we do know is that even elections where they happened, there have been challenges for political parties to move away from the impacts of militarism that they themselves have experienced, and that has led parties to generally look inward, be unable to create constituencies, be unable to create manifestos and policies once they are undergoing elections and once they're in power. And so what that means is that throughout successive decades in Sudan's history, what we've seen is that political parties, as the political elite and the military too, have become embroiled in the security, economic and political life to an extent where it's very difficult for them to now look at and cater to the will of the people. So this disconnect is very much what we see until today.
What's your take on Volker Perth's assessment that Sudan is heading towards an economic and security collapse?
I think it's a fair assessment in many ways. For example, there is a massive food insecurity crisis at the moment. I think Sudan is heading towards a famine because state collapse plus food insecurity and bad failing harvests tends to equal famine. And we're seeing famine in the broader region, so also into northern Ethiopia. And we're also seeing a security situation that is very much involved, has the involvement of not just domestic actors, but also international actors. What we saw very clearly during the Bashir years was that he was able to compartmentalize the conflicts that took place in Sudan to specific areas. So the war between the North and South was fought predominantly in what is now South Sudan. The war in Darfur predominantly kept to the Darfur region, with the central areas, Khartoum, the capital, really only seeing influxes of refugees or IDPs. That is no longer the case. Since the peace process of October 2020, rebels and rebel movements from different parts of the country have become part of the regime in Khartoum, and they were very instrumental in the coup. And so what we have now is a direct causal link between what happens in Khartoum and what happens in these conflict areas. And it's very difficult to entangle one from the other. What that means is that bringing about a sort of a peace, a broader peace within the country, a comprehensive peace, which has never really been achieved despite successive attempts, is going to require a lot more engagement with a lot more stakeholders, right, and non-state as well as state actors.
Right. Do you have any idea what needs to shift? Because historically for the Sudanese, they trust in the power of their uprising, and they have history to show for it, that it works all the time. And that's why no one has been able to keep them away from the streets, despite the brutal crackdown on them. What needs to shift? What more do they need to try this time to return to civilian rule?
I think the street movement is doing all it can. Clearly, there could be greater levels of unity within the civilian government, within the civilian bloc. Political parties need to reach out to this pro-democracy movement, largely made up of neighborhood resistance committees. They need to join their political charter process, which is currently being drafted, which is designed to become a unified framework for the next coming period, for the consolidation of civilian rule. But until the military generals are put in a position where they themselves need to consider handing over power genuinely, those efforts will be in vain, I'm afraid. So yes, political unity within the civilian bloc is important. Having a straightforward and unified platform or roadmap is key. But the generals also need to be incentivized to hand over power and to commit to reforms.
Before I let you go, as a Sudanese yourself, what's the one thing you would like to say to Sudanese people who are facing rising food prices?
I mean, it really depends on who you are. Some people are able to weather this coming period a lot better. What I'm really impressed by as a Sudanese is that even those who have very little and who will be facing the brunt of the oncoming food insecurity are saying that we understand the problems that we're facing and we're willing to, go through this difficult period in order to achieve civilian rule. And I think that is something that is very difficult to disabuse people of that spirit. And we'll probably see more of it in the future. What is quite necessary is that where the international community, where the Sudanese diaspora can help, they should do so, but only if it chimes in and aligns with the wishes of the people on the street.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Kholood Khair, a Sudanese political analyst and a managing partner at Insight Strategy Partners. Thank you. We have more stories coming up for you here on Africa Matters Plus.
I am Kholood David in Abuja. For the last 15 years, Imam Kholood Khair has fed thousands of Muslims during the month of Ramadan. And this year, despite hard economic times, he vows to continue that tradition.
Africa grows a lot of food, but the climate crisis is challenging the continent's ability to feed its 1.3 billion people. I am Darren Alan Cheyune in eastern Uganda, where farmers are turning to solar energy for a constant water supply.
As Ramadan gets underway across the globe, Muslim faithful in Nigeria have begun sharing love, care, and most importantly, food with the poor and vulnerable. One imam in the capital Abuja set up a Ramadan food bank for those in need. Palom David reports.
Allahu Akbar.
Ramadan is a time when Muslims strengthen their relationship with God as they pray and fast. It's also a chance to reflect and give back to community. Here at the Al-Bibiya Mosque in Nigeria's capital Abuja, the sun has just set, so the day's fasting is over. And after prayers, worshippers will sit down to a nightly feast. The national chief imam at this mosque, Kholood Khair, has been providing free meals for the past 15 years to anyone who comes here to break their fast. He calls it a Ramadan food bank.
The history of food bank is an history of compassion. I feel happy and I feel grateful to God that God has used me to do things without talking in this country.
Fundraising takes place throughout the year to raise the $35,000 needed to prepare the meals, and scores of volunteers help out serving the food. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says about 14 million Nigerians are facing critical food shortages. The COVID-19 pandemic, high inflation rates and fuel scarcity have contributed to a hike in the price of food. So, for the faithful who come here throughout Ramadan to break their fast, these free meals are a lifesaver. 20-year-old Abubakar Sabiu is new to the city and says Imam Kholood's kindness is a blessing.
This is my first Ramadan here in Abuja. The way I have myself here in Al-Habibiyya Islamic Center, I really appreciate the way I get food. Before I get this place, I'm really worried, I'm bothered about how can I get myself in terms of having a food during iftar and during sahur.
This mosque served 1,700 meals on the first day of Ramadan. By the end of the month, it would have notched up around 50,000 meals, showing the sense of community here is well and truly alive. Palom David, Africa Matters, Abuja.
The ongoing climate crisis is affecting agricultural production on the African continent, particularly when it comes to finding suitable water sources for crops. But one startup in Uganda is harnessing the power of the sun to help increase crop harvest across 7 African countries. Darren Alan Cheyune reports.
James Mobi has been a farmer for the past 30 years. He lives in eastern Uganda and has mostly practiced mixed farming. This tomato garden is now his main focus, but over the years, he has struggled to make profits.
The biggest problem I have encountered is the dry spells. When I am transplanting my tomatoes from the nursery, I find it hot, but I usually hope that it will rain. But then it does not rain as expected. The tomatoes fail to mature, they don't flower well, and I end up getting little output.
To solve his drought problem, Mobi has found a new solution. He has hired this solar irrigation pump system from Uptech Africa to water his crops.
It has a solar panel that has cells photovoltaic cells that trap or harvest the solar energy or the sun rays. So once they are harvested, they are converted into energy, which is DC. So the DC energy operates the sunlight pump. So the sunlight pump, after receiving the energy, it pulls the water from a surface water source and provides it to our garden through a network of pipes onto the sprinklers.
This solar pump system works best on farms near stable sources of surface water. The solar panel can produce enough energy to pump up to 22,000 liters of water a day. That's enough to water 3 hectares of crops. Uganda normally has 2 periods of rainfall followed by a dry period, but these regular patterns have changed because of the climate crisis. On other farms, the solar pump system is giving farmers who produce quick-growing vegetables the ability to keep up with demand.
My harvest during the dry period was low. In an acre where I would expect 100 boxes, they would hardly come out. But after I got this pump, even though they do not get up there like they would in the rainy season, I used to get 50 boxes, but now I get about 80 boxes.
This system operates on a monthly subscription model costing about $34. And now more than 65 solar installations are up and running across Uganda just in the last year. Compared with common diesel water pumps, this solar initiative offers cleaner energy, thereby reducing carbon emissions by 44 kilograms per installation per year, helping farmers like Mobi to produce better yields and a safer environment too. Darren Alan Cheyune, Africa Matters, Bugweri, Eastern Uganda.
You're watching Africa Matters, and here's a roundup of other stories making news across the continent. On Wednesday, a military court in Burkina Faso handed former President Blaise Compaoré a life sentence in absentia for the assassination of his predecessor, Thomas Sankara. The charismatic revolutionary leader was murdered at the age of 37, along with 12 others during the 1987 coup that brought Compaoré to power. Compaoré ruled for 27 years before being ousted in another coup in 2014 and fleeing to the Ivory Coast, where he is currently thought to be living. Compaoré's security chief and 11 others also received life sentences. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are accusing Ethiopian security forces and their allies of waging a campaign of ethnic cleansing in western Tigray, a long-contested part of northern Ethiopia. A joint report found the abuses were part of a widespread and systematic attack against the Tigrayan civilian population and described the incidences as crimes against humanity as well as war crimes dating back to the beginning of the war in November 2020. The Ethiopian government says it's committed to holding all those responsible to account. When the worldwide pandemic hit 2 years ago, like many industries, the global fashion business crumpled, and it had to change with the times to recover. But in the small African country of Lesotho, women who make up the majority of the garment industry workers are still finding it difficult to get jobs. Ramesa Choda reports.
Every day, more than 100 women in Lesotho leave their homes to queue outside a garment factory in the hope they will be one of the lucky ones to be given a job. Among them is 32-year-old Wakila Sesha, who waits outside the factory for her name to be called. But today, Sesha failed to get one of the jobs on offer.
I am not satisfied because I don't understand why people are being selected by name. We are a big crowd here, and how can they call out individuals' names while the rest of us stand here? Even when the person they call out isn't here, they won't take anyone else to fill their spot.
The clothing industry is the country's largest private employer, mainly supplying jeans and shirts to American chain stores. Textile products account for nearly half of Lesotho's exports, which are worth about $415 million every year, and 80% of its workforce is women.
For the growth of the country, this was very positive because, as you know, if you empower a woman, you empower the nation. because they take care of the children and they take care of the whole families. So it has been very important and pivotal for the country to provide jobs for women through this particular industry.
But since the pandemic began, job losses have been catastrophic. More than 10,000 of Lesotho's 50,000 garment workers have lost their jobs. And the long queues outside the factories remind them that the jobs like this have become increasingly rare.
Lockdown made the already difficult situation even harder because we couldn't leave our homes to go and look for work. I was without work when the lockdown kicked in, and the restrictions on movement meant I had to go without food.
Mabuta is one of the few women who still has a job after the pandemic, and she hopes her son will have a better future. Rumeisa Chodar, Africa Matters.
Kenya is one of Africa's largest dairy producers, with the industry accounting for 14% of the country's agricultural gross domestic product. But dairy farmers face several challenges when it comes to selling their milk due to high commissions and supply chain costs. But there's a growing trend across the country that's helping them. Taibe Aiding has the story.
Amos Njeri is a proud owner of 11 cows in the Kiambu County of Kenya. Every day, he milks more than 200 litres manually. To distribute and sell this vast amount of milk, Njeri benefits from a tool becoming popular in his country.
I mainly sell to those people who sell using ATMs. There are those who come to buy from our home and others are delivered to them. I make almost $105 per day, and that money has helped me in the growth of my family, to take my children to school, and also in the growth of my personal life.
Brokers used to exploit dairy farmers by buying their milk at rock-bottom prices. With the emergence of vending machines, small-scale dairy farmers hope to cut out the middleman and sell directly to the customer. And shopkeepers say the vending machines are simple to use.
The advantages of ATM machine is, one, easy to maintain, and it's very fast to serve customers. The thirdly, when you store milk behind it, it is ever fresh, so that the customer can drink directly. It has come from the farm.
The demand for automated vending machines is booming across the country, and the main reason is that it's cheap.
It's more cheaper, and when you cook tea with this milk from the ATM, actually is the best because it has no preservatives, it has no additives, it has nothing, even it's not diluted.
The vending machines are proving popular, but some say it might be harmful to health due to the unhygienic conditions of the milk containers.
And now you find that many of the farmers, especially here in Kenya, they have not adopted the food-grade materials. So they end up using the plastic handling containers that are not hygienic at all, and you cannot be able to guarantee their hygiene. Because one thing, you cannot be able to clean them sufficiently, using even hot water and even other detergents.
Despite the concern over the hygiene of the plastic bottles, these vending machines appear to be here to stay. Dairy farmers make bigger profits, and Kenyans enjoy cheaper and fresher milk. Taiba Aiden, Africa Matters.
This week, we explore Bobo-Dioulasso, the second largest city in Burkina Faso and one of its regional capitals. Have a look. That's our show this week. Please share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode or ideas you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag AfricaMatters. Feel free to reach out to me on my personal handle at @DeshewaJosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters TRT World. Like, comment, and share. We have these pictures for you from across the continent. Enjoy it, and I'll see you next week.